begin very briefly, because I think a lot of you will be familiar with Easton Pearson, but the article in the magazine was in a section which we call, what do you call it? On location. Very briefly, and just kick off though, a little bit about the story of how the company, you call it a company, or you call it a practice, or you call it a brand, or all of those things, depending on the day.
And anything else?
So, a little bit about the story. How did it begin? And how did it get, how many years? 21 years or something?
21 years. We started 21 years ago. That's 1989 in Brisbane. And we were both a lot younger and much more idealistic than we are today. And we thought it would be fantastic to work together and make dresses, because in those days it was very difficult to buy dresses. Everybody had skirts and tops and pants and jackets. And in the Queensland weather, everybody wanted to wear dresses. So that's how we began.
Where were the ideas coming from when you started off?
I think the very first collection we did was very much based on vintage clothing, and Lydia and I have both always been very avid op shoppers. We always dressed in vintage and op shop clothes. So, and that's still very important to us today. Lots of our references come from vintage and antique and historic clothing. So it's definitely the first collection was very much based on op shop, and we were very restricted by the textile we could use because we were so tiny. We could use only things that we could buy off the shelf, and we used some actual furnishing fabric for one of the very first collections.
So what about getting out to market though? I mean, how did you sell the stuff originally?
The hardest thing, I think, for us was to actually give the brand an identity, and that took a few years, and it went through a few incarnations before it really started to get a proper identity. And in fact, I think what actually stamped us didn't happen for about 3 or 4 years after we began, and at the end of the 80s and the beginning of the 90s, everyone was wearing Japanese clothes. Everything was black and oversized, and we both really liked colourful clothes. So I think once we actually got over being embarrassed about liking things like that and realising that there were other people in the world who wanted to dress that way as well, we started to establish a handwriting for what our clothing brand was going to be.
Yeah, we've worked with this one man and his workroom for 15, 16 years. And his business and his workroom has grown with us. And at one stage he had about 350 people working with him. And I think at the moment he has about 60 people, depending on the amount of work we're able to give him, and that depends on the amount of the demand for embellishment and decoration from the market.
But one of the things that we always have to do whenever we're working with the artisans that we work with in India is try to imperfect them. We were always saying, but Malti, it looks like it's done by a machine, it's too perfect, can't you rough it up a bit, can't you make that flower look like, make this petal big here and make this petal little here. And he used to look at us as if we'd insulted him so badly. And now he knows that he has to do it because that's what we need, but he actually can't do it. Just like I couldn't draw a perfect circle to save my life, he can't draw a little lopsided squiggly spot because it's just not what he was ever taught. So we spent a lot of time freeing up his hand, and same with the screen makers. They could draw anything and make it look like it had been done by a machine, and we want to show the human hand that's behind all the work.
So let's talk about rugs, because all of these rugs that you see here are done by these guys for Designer Rugs. So that suggests that you must have diversified in some ways. So can we just talk a little bit about the rugs? How did it happen? And how do you actually design a rug?
Well, Designer Rugs asked us if we would like to do a project with them, and we said yes, very enthusiastically. But designing a rug was much more challenging for us than designing a garment. When we started thinking about a big scale, it was fairly scary. But the inspiration for the rugs is actually chintz fabric. And so we started designing on a very tiny scale, and like 2 by 3 inch, something like that. And then we enlarged them. So they're really tiny fragments of very ancient chintzes that we've manipulated and cropped and adjusted. So they they also have an Indian origin, because the chintz was made in the 16th and 17th century in Eastern India for the East India Company, and it was originally made for floor covering, and then it became very popular and was worn as clothing, for clothing, and so we thought that was a very nice connection to have, to bring them back to the floor. We had a really wonderful experience a few years ago in Varanasi. We were fortunate enough to be introduced to this very elderly gentleman who was the head of a textile company, and he still had weavers who worked for him and produced all sorts of cotton and silk textile. And he showed us his collection of antique fabric swatches. They were incredibly beautiful, and some of them were very, very fine. And some of them hadn't been woven for 150 years. And we were very naive and said to him, could you recreate this particular one for us? And he was delighted, and he said, well, yes, of course I could, but it would be more expensive than the finest silk. It was a cotton. Anyway, we went ahead and did it. It was just a fabulous project to do.
It was a great project, but it was not really one of those money-making exercises.
No, but lots of things that we do are not money-making, but very satisfying in the outcome.
Join me in thanking Pamela and Lydia. Thank you.
Thank you.